I ran into a fellow named Walt Anderson at one point, and Walt had made his money off of telecom and information type activities, and he had quite a bit of money. And Walt was really a hero of the cause because he was one of the first guys to put his money where his mouth was in the space field. He had just finished investing in a company with a fellow named Gary Hudson, Rotary Rocket, that had basically blown something more than $20 million of his own money. But he liked the Space Frontier Foundation. He liked our attitude. Walt was a bit of an anarchist, libertarian anarchist. And he worked with me over time, and eventually we created an organization called FINDS, the Foundation for the International Non-Government Development of Space. Walt put $25 million into an endowment and made me the executive director, which for a science fiction guy, by the way, the job description was give money to cool space projects that will advance the cause of opening space to humanity. And a great salary, yeah. I had an office on Ventura Boulevard in LA. I had a staff, I had a salary, and my job was once a month to present Walt and one other gentleman named Gus Gardellini with a list of projects that deserved to be funded. They almost never said no, and I would go out and give them money. So we funded Leak Marabou with laser launch. We funded asteroid research, how to break down asteroids into their elements. We funded Return to the Moon conferences. We funded, what else? Robotic studies with Carnegie Mellon and a fellow named Red Whitaker. We funded all kinds of stuff. And we funded, helped to, I think, a thing called Yuri's Night, which is a big space party. We helped get that started a little bit. On and on and on. We funded a project to give a little bit of money went into a project called Permission to Dream to give telescopes to kids in different countries. It was a dream job. And what came out of that was, around that time, the Russians had been under pressure from the United States government to throw the Mir away because it was going to basically clog up the works for this new international space station they were talking about. Anyway, in the mid-90s, we had established FINDS, which was this endowment to advance the cause of opening space. And at the same time, the Russians were under a lot of pressure to get rid of their space station, Mir. Basically, the US government wanted it out of the way because they had this bright, shiny new thing coming down the pike that was going to be the International Space Station. And they wanted that to be the centerpiece. Well, through some contacts that we had, we began to understand that there was a possibility of, and they'd had a lot of shysters go through Moscow and said they want to buy it or lease it or that, this and that and the other, and they were pretty well shysters. But we actually had a plan and some money, and I had testified in 1995 in front of Congress, and my testimony was called Alpha Town. And Alpha Town was about the idea of how you use the dollars going into the space station to leverage the development of a community in space. In other words, how could the space station that was going to be built be used to leverage through its expenditures development of transportation and other facilities. One of the facilities I mentioned was Mir, and I said we shouldn't throw it away. We should use it as a way to expand what's going on and maybe move it over next to the space station and start a community in space. What I call the Orbital Street, or Alpha Town was the name of the community. I also said at the time we need to develop power beaming in space for space-to-space uses so we could learn to use it, and then maybe even at some day we could beam it back to the Earth if it made sense. But space-to-space is much more useful way of doing it. And there were several other tenets to it. But then a friend of mine named David Anderman in the foundation kind of threw that in my face when the Russians were getting ready to deorbit the Mir. He said, Rick, you said use it. Why don't we try and save it? So the Space Frontier Foundation began a project called Keep Mir Alive, KMA. We like funny acronyms, KMA. Anyway, there's always a sense of humor with us, always. We have to laugh at what we're doing. We get way too serious, you know. Anyway, the point is that Keep Mir Alive started as a project that was sort of rhetorical, activist-oriented. Then we got a little further into it, and there were some numbers being bandied about. And for example, I got invited to a meeting down at Johnson Space Center a very private meeting with George Abbey, who ran Johnson Space Center, and in this Italian restaurant, and he had these military guys there, and they were talking about the real cost of Russian resupply rockets. And these were numbers I'd never heard before, because they were talking about the real cost, not what NASA got charged. And I put those numbers in my head, and I said, wow, that's pretty low. There's an interesting case to be made there. At the same time, a fellow named Joe Carroll, who had worked on tethers in space, which were these electrodynamic means of keeping objects in space very, very cheaply. Pennies, tenths of pennies on the dollar, as far as carrying propellant up to fire jets to pump you higher, or rockets. These would do it using the magnetic force of the Earth pushing you away. Brilliant idea. Joe's a genius. Well, he had that idea, and so we combined that with the thought of the progress stuff and the fact that we were talking about how do we keep Mir alive. And there were some introductions made with a guy named Vladimir Seremetnikov, who came over to one of our conferences. I put him and Joe together. We took $10,000 out of fines, funded the two of them to report back to us with a study about using a tether to keep the Mir alive, to keep it in space. They got back to me, that was December of, I want to say 97, 98. It was feasible. I then talked to Walt, and at one point, and this is in a documentary that's out there called Orphans of Apollo, but I said, Walt, how would you like a space station? He said, yeah, I think that'd be great. I said, well, I think we can get it. He's like, okay, well, let's start working on that. And the rest of the story is, like I said, it's written about in some books and some documentaries, but basically, I will say this, because this is often overlooked. Our original purpose was to take the Mir and push it up to like 500 miles, mothball it. We didn't want to compete with the United States government. We didn't want to compete with the International Space Station. We wanted to mothball it and take our time and come up with something to do with it. Maybe it would be the new campus of the International Space University. You know, maybe it would be a new business. We had no intention at the time of quote unquote flying tourists or anything like that. We were talking to the guys who created a TV show called Survivor and others, because we wanted to create multiple revenue streams. But what happened was the United States State Department blocked our technology transfer of the tether, and we had to come up with ways to pay the rent. And so we said, okay, well, what can we do? Well, maybe there's some people that are interested in flying. I ended up doing a talk that was an update in LA in front of a group called the Space Tourism Society, run by a friend named John Spencer. There was a guy in the audience named Dennis Tito. Dennis had tried before to fly to the International Space Station, and it hadn't worked out. He asked John Spencer who I was. John and a couple of other people set up a meeting. I went over and saw Dennis. I said, would you like to fly? He said, yeah. I said, I think we can do that. We had two meetings, and within a little while of the second meeting, we did a handshake. I'm from Texas. I believe in handshakes. And he transferred $1 million in escrow over to the MirCorp. I called Jeff Manber in Moscow and said, we're go, and that project started. Later on, it got a little dicey. There were some issues that came up, the little one being we lost the Mir. So MirCorp, working with Energia, the Russian company that was our partner, and the Russian Space Agency, and Dennis Tito's own lawyers, followed it through and put him onto the International Space Station. The public price was $20 million. The real price was closer to 15 or 16, and it's gone up since then. Strangely, it's supposed to go down. So that was, one of the flight of Dennis Tito was one of the opening shots of the revolution. The other, I believe, was the leasing of the Mir. The leasing of the Mir showed that there were people willing to invest in it, and that, like, quote unquote, regular folks could actually create or own or lease property in space. Dennis Tito then coming along, showing there were people who might pay some money to go up there. And then the third big shot, I think, was the X Prize.